There's a special kind of pain that comes from losing custody of your child, watching someone else raise the person you love most in this world. Kyle Patterson knew that pain every single day. After a brutal divorce left him broke and alone, he lost everything, including his role as a father. With only $300 to his name, Kyle bought a rusted old muscle car just to have a roof over his head. He parked it behind an abandoned garage and tried to accept his new reality. But while cleaning out the trunk one night, Kyle found a hidden panel. Behind it was something unexpected: vintage racing gear, old championship papers, and a signed contract. This forgotten car wasn't worthless at all, it was worth a fortune. Could this discovery give him the second chance he desperately needed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The November rain hammered against the Barracuda's roof like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop a reminder of how far Kyle Patterson had fallen. He lay curled in the back seat, his 52-year-old body protesting against the awkward position, a thin sleeping bag doing little to ward off the cold seeping through the cracked vinyl. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal remains of Earl's abandoned garage, rattling loose sheets of corrugated metal that had long since given up their battle against time. This wasn't how life was supposed to turn out. Kyle shifted, his back spasming in response. Through the fogged window, he could make out the faint glow of streetlights 2 blocks away, where normal people lived in normal houses with normal problems. People who didn't know what it felt like to lose everything in the span of 18 months. People who still had their dignity intact. The divorce papers sat in a manila envelope on the front passenger seat, gathering dust. Kyle didn't need to read them anymore. Every word was burned into his memory. The court's decision had been clinical, mathematical. Assets divided, debts assigned, custody determined. Claire had gotten the house, naturally. She had the stable job, the family support, the lawyer who knew how to make Kyle look like exactly what he'd become, a broken man spiraling downward. He'd been a mechanic for 30 years, a good one, the kind of man people trusted with their vehicles, their safety, their family's well-being. Patterson's Automotive had been his pride, a small independent shop where he'd built a reputation for honest work and fair prices. But the economy had shifted, the big chains had moved in, and then his marriage had started crumbling. The stress had affected his work. He'd made mistakes, small ones at first, then bigger. A misdiagnosis here, a delayed repair there. Word spread in a small community, customers vanished. The shop had closed 14 months ago. The divorce had been finalized 6 months after that. Kyle rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble that had grown into a proper beard over the past few weeks. His hands were still a mechanic's hands, scarred, calloused, permanently stained with oil that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. These hands had once held his daughter when she was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. These same hands had signed away his parental rights when the court deemed him financially and emotionally unfit. Iris. God, he missed Iris. She was 19 now, in her 2nd year of college. They'd been close once, back when she was young enough to think her father hung the moon. He'd taught her how to change a tire when she was 12, how to check oil at 14. She'd loved those moments in the garage, loved learning, loved spending time with him. But the divorce had poisoned everything. Claire had painted him as unreliable, unstable, a man who couldn't keep his business afloat or his life together. The worst part was that Claire hadn't really lied. She'd just emphasized certain truths and ignored others. Iris's phone calls had grown shorter, colder. The last time they'd spoken, 3 weeks ago, she'd asked for money to help with textbooks. Kyle had exactly $17 in his pocket at the time. He'd lied and said he'd send something next week. She'd sighed that disappointed sigh that cut deeper than any angry words and told him not to bother if it was going to be another broken promise. He hadn't called back since. The Barracuda had been a desperate purchase, made with the last $300 from selling his tools. a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda, rusted and battered, sitting in a salvage yard like a forgotten monument to American muscle. The seller had been surprised anyone wanted it. "She's rough, buddy, probably worth more in parts than whole." But Kyle hadn't been looking for an investment. He'd been looking for shelter. Earl Hobson, the 78-year-old owner of the abandoned garage, had found Kyle the first night. The old man had shuffled out in his bathrobe, suspicious at first, then sympathetic when he'd understood the situation. "You can stay," Earl had said, his voice rough with age and unfiltered cigarettes, "but keep it quiet. City code enforcement would have my hide if they knew." That had been 2 months ago. Earl checked on him most mornings, bringing coffee sometimes, or day-old donuts from the bakery where his daughter worked. The old man didn't pry, didn't judge. He'd been a mechanic himself, back in the day. He understood how quickly fortune could turn. The other regular visitor was Mac Donnelly, Kyle's former co-worker from Patterson's Automotive. Mac had landed on his feet after the shop closed, finding work at one of the big chain stores. He stopped by every week or so, with groceries, nothing fancy, just bread, peanut butter, canned soup. Things that didn't require refrigeration or cooking. Mac always acted like it was no big deal, like he just happened to have extras. Kyle appreciated the charity, even as it stung his pride. The rain was letting up now, fading to a steady drizzle. Kyle sat up carefully, his spine crackling in protest. The interior of the Barracuda was cramped and musty, filled with the smell of old vinyl, mildew, and his own unwashed body. A duffel bag in the footwell held everything he owned now: 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a disposable razor, the divorce papers, and a single photograph. He pulled out the photograph, careful not to bend it. The picture showed Iris at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, standing beside him in the garage. Her hands were covered in grease, and she looked absolutely delighted. Kyle had his arm around her shoulders, both of them mugging for Claire's camera. Simpler times, better times. He tucked the photo back into the bag and climbed out of the car, stretching in the cold morning air. The garage was a cavernous space, empty except for rusted equipment and decades of accumulated junk. Earl had stopped working years ago, letting the place fall into comfortable decay. The roof leaked in places, and birds nested in the rafters, but it kept the worst of the weather off the Barracuda. Kyle walked around the car, assessing it with a mechanic's eye. The body was rough, paint faded and peeling, chrome pitted with rust, one headlight cracked. The interior was worse, with torn seats and a cracked dashboard. But underneath all that neglect, the bones were solid, the frame was straight, the engine block intact. With time and money and expertise, this car could be beautiful again. He had 2 of those 3 things. The morning routine was always the same. Walk to the gas station 2 blocks away, use the bathroom to wash up as best he could, buy a cup of coffee with whatever change he had. Then, back to the garage to figure out how to fill another day. Sometimes Mac had small jobs for him, helping friends with car repairs for cash under the table. Sometimes Earl needed help moving things around the garage. Mostly, though, the days were long and empty. This morning, Kyle decided, he'd give the Barracuda a proper cleaning. It was the least he could do for the vehicle, providing him shelter. Besides, keeping busy helped quiet the thoughts that crept in during idle moments, thoughts about failure and loss, and the growing certainty that he'd never climb out of this hole. He gathered the few cleaning supplies. He had rags, an old bottle of simple green, a worn brush. Starting with the exterior, he scrubbed away months of grime, revealing more of the faded paint beneath. The work was meditative, familiar. His hands knew what to do. By mid-morning, he'd moved to the interior, pulling out accumulated trash and debris. Fast food wrappers from previous owners, old newspapers, broken plastic parts. The front seat cleaned up reasonably well. He moved to the back, removing the sleeping bag and his belongings to access the corners and crevices. Then he opened the trunk. It was filled with more of the same junk, debris, things left behind and forgotten. He pulled it all out methodically, stacking it beside the car. Beneath the loose items was a trunk mat, old and brittle. Kyle lifted it to clean underneath. That's when he noticed something odd. The trunk floor didn't look right. There was a slight unevenness, a gap along one edge where the carpet didn't quite meet the wall. Kyle ran his fingers along the seam, feeling for the irregularity. His mechanic's instincts kicked in. This wasn't factory standard. He pressed down on different sections of the floor, listening, feeling. In the far corner, something gave slightly. He worked his fingers into the gap and pulled. With a soft crack of old adhesive, a panel lifted free. Beneath it was a hidden compartment, and inside that compartment was a leather portfolio, weathered and cracked with age. Kyle's heart began to pound as he lifted it out carefully, his hands suddenly unsteady. The portfolio was heavy, substantial. He carried it to a workbench, where light from a grimy window provided better illumination. Inside were photographs, documents, papers yellowed with time but still legible. His breath caught as he began to understand what he was looking at. Racing photographs. A Plymouth Barracuda, this Plymouth Barracuda, he realized, checking the distinctive body modifications crossing a finish line. A young woman standing beside it, trophy in hand, her expression fierce and proud. More photos showed the car in action, engine exposed, surrounded by people in period clothing from the early 70s. And then the documents. Original paperwork bearing official seals, championship certificates, a competition log detailing victories. Kyle's hands trembled as he found the key document, a race program from the 1971 Iron Mountain Rally. And there, listed as the winner in the modified muscle class, Jackie Mercer, driving a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda. The VIN number listed matched the one on his car. He checked it 3 times, walking out to verify the number stamped on the dashboard, then back to the document. Perfect match. Kyle sank onto a stool, the papers spread before him, his mind reeling. This wasn't just any old Barracuda. This was a piece of history. A championship car, driven by someone named Jackie Mercer in legitimate documented races. For the first time in months, something that felt dangerously like hope flickered in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this worthless car he'd been living in was worth something after all. Kyle couldn't sleep that night. The leather portfolio lay on the front seat, inches from where his head rested against the window. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind churned through possibilities, questions, doubts. The racing documents felt too good to be true, like finding a winning lottery ticket in a garbage can. Morning came with pale grey light filtering through the garage's broken windows. Kyle sat up, his body aching from another restless night, and reached for the portfolio before he'd even fully awakened. He needed to see it again, to confirm it hadn't been some fever dream brought on by desperation. The photographs were still there. Jackie Mercer still grinned fiercely beside the Barracuda, frozen in that moment of triumph from 54 years ago. The documents still bore the official seals and signatures. The VIN still matched. Kyle dressed quickly and walked to the public library when it opened at 9. He couldn't afford internet access, but the library computers were free for an hour at a time. His fingers fumbled on the keyboard as he searched for information about Jackie Mercer and the 1971 Iron Mountain Rally. The results were sparse but electrifying. Jackie Mercer had been a female racing driver in an era when such women were vanishingly rare. She'd competed primarily in underground and semi-sanctioned races throughout the early 70s, earning a reputation for aggressive driving and mechanical genius. The Iron Mountain Rally had been her crowning achievement, a brutal cross-country endurance race that pushed both drivers and machines to their limits. Kyle found a digitized newspaper clipping from 1971, The grainy photograph showed Jackie standing on a platform, holding a trophy. The caption read, "Local driver Jackie Mercer defeats field in grueling mountain race." His heart hammered as he read further. Jackie had disappeared from racing in 1972, citing financial difficulties and lack of sponsorship opportunities. One article mentioned that female drivers struggled to be taken seriously, often denied entry to major sanctioned events. The trail went cold after that. No more mentions of Jackie Mercer in racing contexts. Kyle's hour was almost up when he found an obituary from 1998. Jackie had died at 63, unmarried, no children listed. The brief notice mentioned her work as a machinist and her former career as a pioneering female race car driver. Pioneering. The word stuck with Kyle as he walked back to the garage. The afternoon was spent examining every inch of the hidden compartment, making sure he hadn't missed anything. His fingers traced the edges carefully, and that's when he felt another slight irregularity, a small envelope tucked into a corner seam, easy to miss in the initial excitement. Inside was a single document that made Kyle's breath stop. It was a contract bearing the letterhead of Chrysler Corporation, dated October 1970. The language was technical, full of engineering specifications and legal terminology, but the essential facts were clear. This Barracuda had been built as a one-of-one prototype, featuring experimental engine modifications and custom bodywork not available on production models. The contract specified that the vehicle was being provided to Jackie Mercer for racing evaluation and promotional purposes. Both parties had signed, a Chrysler executive whose signature was an illegible scrawl, and Jackie Mercer in precise, confident handwriting. Kyle's hands shook so badly he had to set the document down on the workbench. A factory prototype, a one-of-one, driven by a legitimate racing pioneer. This wasn't just a forgotten champion, this was potentially a collector's dream. He paced the garage, his mind racing faster than his feet. How much could something like this be worth? Thousands? Tens of thousands? More? He had no frame of reference for classic car values, especially something this rare and historically significant. Earl found him 20 minutes later, still pacing, the documents spread across the workbench like treasure from a shipwreck. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the old man said, shuffling closer. "What's got you so worked up?" Kyle couldn't keep it in anymore. The words tumbled out in a rush: the hidden compartment, the racing history, Jackie Mercer's championship, the prototype contract. He showed Earl everything, watching the old man's rheumy eyes widen as he processed the information. Earl studied the documents for a long time, his weathered hands careful with the fragile papers. Finally, he looked up at Kyle with an expression that mixed wonder and concern. "This could be real money, son," Earl said quietly. "Real, life-changing money, but you need to be careful. Word gets out about something like this, and you might have problems you're not ready for." "What kind of problems?" "Thieves, for one. Scammers, for another. People who'd try to cheat you out of what it's worth, or people who'd just steal the car outright." Earl gestured at the Barracuda with his chin. "Right now, it looks like junk. Nobody's going to give it a second glance. But if you start talking about it, showing these papers around, you paint a target on your back." Kyle nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in Earl's words. He was vulnerable here, homeless, desperate, with no resources to protect something valuable. If someone decided to take the car, what could he do? Call the police and explain he'd been living in a potentially valuable vehicle behind an abandoned garage. "So, what do I do?" Kyle asked, hearing the desperation creep into his voice. Earl thought for a moment. "First, you keep this quiet. Me, you, and nobody else for now. Second, you figure out what you've really got here. Get it authenticated by someone who knows their business. Third, you decide what you want to do with it." He paused, his expression softening. "But Kyle, I'll tell you this, don't sell it quick just because you're hurting. Desperation makes people take the first offer, and the first offer is rarely the best one. They talked for another hour, Earl sharing stories of his own days in the automotive world, warning Kyle about the pitfalls and predators that circled valuable finds. By the time the old man shuffled back to his house, Kyle felt marginally more grounded, though no less overwhelmed. That evening, Mac stopped by with groceries, a bag of apples, some canned chili, a loaf of bread. Kyle almost told him about the discovery, but caught himself at the last second, remembering Earl's warning. Instead, he asked a hypothetical question. Mac, if someone found something valuable, like really valuable, what would they need to do to make sure they didn't get cheated when they sold it? Mac set down the grocery bag and studied Kyle's face. This a hypothetical situation, or are we talking about something real? Just hypothetical. Curious. Mac didn't look convinced, but he played along. Well, first thing is authentication. Get an expert to verify it's real and determine what it's worth. Experts cost money, though. Then you'd want to find the right market, not just any buyer, but the specific people who'd pay premium prices for that particular thing. And you'd want legal protection, someone to make sure the contracts are fair. All of that costs money. Yeah, it does. Anything valuable is going to require some investment to sell properly. Mac picked up an apple, tossed it to Kyle. Why do I get the feeling this isn't actually hypothetical? Kyle caught the apple and managed a tired smile. Maybe I'm just planning for the future, thinking about what I'd do if my luck ever changed. Your luck is going to change, Kyle. I believe that. Just don't make any rash decisions when it does, okay? Talk to people you trust first. After Mac left, Kyle sat in the driver's seat of the Barracuda, the portfolio in his lap, staring through the windshield at the darkening garage. The car that had been his last resort, his rock bottom, his shelter against the world, this car might actually be his salvation. But Earl's words echoed in his mind. Don't sell it quick, just because you're hurting. Kyle made a decision then. He would do this right. He would research, plan, and authenticate. He would honor whatever value this car had, honor Jackie Mercer's legacy. He wouldn't act out of desperation, even if desperation was eating him alive. He carefully returned the documents to the portfolio and hid it under the front seat, covering it with his duffel bag. Then he climbed into the back seat, pulled the sleeping bag over himself, and lay staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, Kyle fell asleep with something other than despair in his heart. It felt fragile and dangerous, but it felt like hope. Kyle woke before dawn, his mind already churning. Sleep had been fitful, filled with dreams of hidden treasures and missed opportunities. He dressed in the cold darkness and walked to the gas station, where he splashed water on his face and stared at his reflection in the scratched mirror. The man looking back was weathered, tired, but something had changed in his eyes, purpose, maybe, or possibility. By the time the library opened, Kyle was waiting at the doors. He logged onto a computer and began searching systematically classic car values, Plymouth Barracuda prototypes, Jackie Mercer's racing career, authentication services for vintage vehicles. Each search led to 3 more questions. He learned that factory prototypes were exceptionally rare. Most were destroyed after testing or locked away in corporate collections. The few that entered private hands commanded astronomical prices at auction. A standard 1,970 Barracuda in excellent condition might fetch $30,000 to $40,000. But a documented prototype with racing provenance? The numbers varied wildly, but every forum and article suggested 6 figures wasn't unreasonable. 6 figures. The concept was so foreign to Kyle's current reality that he almost laughed. He was living in a car, counting pennies for coffee, and reading about vehicles worth more than houses. The research on Jackie Mercer yielded more details. She'd been born in 1935, learned mechanics from her father, who ran a small garage in Pennsylvania. By the late 60s, she was building and racing her own cars, fighting for entry into events that often excluded women outright. The Iron Mountain Rally had been her greatest victory, and apparently her last major race. Kyle found a brief interview from 1972, digitized and posted on a vintage racing blog. Jackie's words were matter-of-fact, but tinged with bitterness. "I can beat any man on the track, but I can't make them take me seriously off it. Sponsors want pretty girls in swimsuits, not grease-stained women who actually know how to build engines. I'm done fighting that battle." Something about her resignation resonated with Kyle. He understood what it felt like to be dismissed, judged, found wanting by systems that didn't care about your actual abilities. His hour ran out, but he'd found what he needed: the name of a classic car authentication expert based 2 states away. Gregory Palmer, a specialist in American muscle cars with a reputation for thorough, honest evaluations. His services weren't cheap. A basic authentication started at $500. Kyle had $17 in his pocket. Walking back to the garage, he did the math. Mac usually had odd jobs that paid $20 or $30. Earl sometimes needed help that was worth a meal or a few bucks. At that rate, saving $500 would take months, and that was just for authentication. Restoration would cost thousands more. The impossibility of it threatened to crush the fragile hope he'd been nurturing. Back at the garage, Kyle pulled the portfolio from its hiding place and found the envelope he'd discovered the day before. He examined it more carefully now, noting it had been sealed with wax at some point, though the seal had long since crumbled. Inside was the prototype contract, but as he unfolded it fully, another piece of paper slipped out. A smaller envelope, yellowed and brittle. Kyle's hands were steadier now as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper, the ink faded but legible. The handwriting matched the signature on the contract, Jackie Mercer's confident script. The note was dated the 15th of March, 1972. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, it means the Barracuda survived. I hope she ended up with someone who appreciates what she represents. This car was supposed to be my future proof that women could compete and win. But the world wasn't ready for that future, and I couldn't keep fighting. I'm hiding these documents because they prove what this car is. A one-of-one prototype, a champion, a piece of history that the world tried to forget. Maybe someday she'll matter to someone. Maybe she'll get the recognition she deserves. If you're reading this, I hope you treat her with respect. She earned it, even if I never got mine. Jackie." Kyle read the note 3 times, each word settling deeper into his consciousness. Jackie hadn't just hidden documents, she'd deliberately created a time capsule, a message to the future. She'd known the car's value, both monetary and historical, and she'd trusted that someday someone would find it and understand. The weight of that trust was humbling. He sat on the stool beside the workbench, Jackie's note in his hands, and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about survival anymore, wasn't just about finding a way out of his current nightmare. This was about honoring a legacy, about finishing something Jackie had started 50 years ago. Earl found him an hour later, still sitting there, lost in thought. "You okay, son?" Kyle showed him the note. Earl read it slowly, his weathered face growing thoughtful. "She knew," Earl said quietly. "She knew what she had, and she knew the world wasn't ready to appreciate it. So she preserved it for later, for someone who'd understand. I can't afford to authenticate it," Kyle admitted. $500 might as well be 5,000 right now. Earl was quiet for a moment. How much work would the car need to be presentable for an expert? Kyle walked around the Barracuda, assessing it with fresh eyes. "Cosmetically, a lot. But mechanically, I could get her running. The engine's solid, just needs cleaning and tuning. Bodywork is mostly surface rust. Interior needs attention, but nothing structural." "Could you do that work yourself?" "Most of it, yeah. I'd need parts, though, and time." Earl nodded slowly. "I'll make you a deal. You help me clean out this garage, really clean it, organize all this junk, make it functional again, and you can use the space and tools." Whatever parts you can salvage from the scrap in here, they're yours. And I'll front you 200 toward that authentication fee. Kyle stared at the old man. Earl, I can't. Yes, you can. I'm not giving you charity. I'm investing in a project. Besides, I'm curious now. I want to know if Jackie's car is really worth what we think it might be. Earl extended his hand. Deal? Kyle shook it, his throat tight. Deal. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. That garage is full of 40 years of accumulated mess. You're going to earn every penny. They spent the rest of the day planning. Earl showed Kyle where tools were buried under debris, pointed out parts that might be useful, explained which piles could be thrown out and which held potential value. The work was overwhelming, but it was work purposeful, forward-moving. That evening, Mac stopped by and found them knee-deep in old tires and rusted equipment. He pitched in without asking questions, hauling trash to a dumpster Earl had arranged for delivery. During a break, Kyle made a decision. Mac had been loyal through everything. He deserved honesty. Mac, I need to tell you something. He explained about the hidden compartment, showed him the photographs and documents, shared Jackie's note. Mac listened with growing amazement, handling each piece of evidence with the reverence it deserved. Kyle, this is incredible. Do you know what you've got here? I'm starting to. That's why I need to be careful. Earl's helping me get it authenticated properly. Mac nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Just keep it quiet. Don't mention it to anyone. And maybe, if you hear about any parts I might need, let me know. I can do better than that. Shop's throwing out some inventory next week, discontinued parts, old stock. I'll see what I can salvage for you. After Mac left, Kyle sat in the Barracuda as darkness settled over the garage. Jackie's note was in his pocket now, carefully folded. He pulled it out and read it again by the dome light. I won't let you down, he whispered to her memory. I promise. The work consumed Kyle's days. He and Earl established a routine mornings, spent sorting through decades of accumulated garage detritus, afternoons dedicated to the Barracuda itself. The physical labor was punishing for a man sleeping in a car, his body never fully resting, but Kyle welcomed the exhaustion. It kept darker thoughts at bay. 3 weeks into the project, Kyle discovered another treasure. He'd been carefully removing the trunk's inner panels, checking for rust and structural damage, when his fingers found a gap he'd missed before. Behind the panel where he'd found the portfolio was another space, smaller and more deliberately concealed. His heart raced as he worked the panel free. Inside was a small notebook, bound in cracked leather, pages yellowed and brittle. Kyle carried it to the workbench with shaking hands. The first page bore an inscription in that familiar, confident handwriting, Racing Journal, Jackie Mercer, 1970. It was her personal diary of the racing season. Kyle sat on the stool and began reading. Jackie's entries were sporadic but vivid, chronicling her experiences, building the Barracuda, fighting for entry into races, dealing with sponsors who wanted her as decoration rather than competitor. Her voice came through the decades, sharp, funny, occasionally bitter, always determined. The 14th of June, 1970. Chrysler engineer actually listened today, showed him my intake modifications, and he didn't patronize me. Small victories. The 3rd of August, 1970. Rejected from Riverside again. They said, insurance concerns. Translation, we don't want a woman making our boys look bad. The 22nd of October, 1970. First test run with the prototype. She's fast. She's beautiful. She's mine. Kyle read for hours, forgetting lunch, forgetting the cold. Jackie's journey paralleled his own in ways that made his chest ache. She'd fought against a system that judged her before she'd proven herself. She'd persevered despite constant rejection. She'd poured everything into this car because it represented more than transportation or even competition. It represented validation. The entries from 1971 covered the Iron Mountain Rally in detail. Jackie described the route, the competition, the mechanical challenges. Her writing grew more energized as she recounted passing competitor after competitor, the Barracuda performing flawlessly despite brutal conditions. The 28th of March 1971, we won. We actually won. Standing on that platform holding the trophy, seeing those men who dismissed me forced to applaud, I'll never forget it. This is what I built her for. But the later entries, from 1972, carried a different tone. The 15th of January 1972, another sponsorship rejection. They want me in a swimsuit holding a wrench, not actually using one. I'm tired. The 9th of February 1972, sold my tools to pay rent. Still have the Barracuda, but what's the point if I can't race her? The final entry was dated the 14th of March, 1972, the day before she'd written the note Kyle had found. I can't keep fighting. The money's gone, the opportunities are gone, and I'm exhausted from proving myself over and over to people who'll never truly accept that a woman belongs in this world. I'm hiding the documentation. Maybe someday it'll matter to someone. Maybe someday she'll get the recognition she deserves, even if I never did. If you're reading this, whoever you are, I hope you treat her right. She's special, even if the world couldn't see it. Kyle closed the journal, his eyes burning. Jackie had given up not because she lacked ability or determination, but because the world had simply worn her down. She'd been defeated by systems and prejudices she couldn't overcome alone. He understood the defeat intimately. But there was a crucial difference. Jackie had created an opportunity for the future. She'd preserved the evidence, hidden it carefully, trusted that someday circumstances would change. Her defeat hadn't been complete because she'd planted seeds for someone else's victory. That someone, Kyle realized, was supposed to be him. The thought was overwhelming. He was supposed to honor this legacy, restore this car, tell Jackie's story. But how could he do that when he could barely keep himself fed? His phone rang, a rare enough occurrence that it startled him. The number was familiar and dreaded in equal measure. Iris. Kyle stepped outside the garage before answering, needing privacy for whatever this conversation would bring. Hello? Dad? Her voice was tentative, uncertain. Hey, sweetheart, it's good to hear from you. A pause. Then, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Kyle's stomach tightened. Okay, are you all right? Like, really all right? Mum said she heard you're living in a car, but she lies about you sometimes, so I didn't know if... Her voice caught. Is it true? Kyle closed his eyes. He could lie, preserve what little dignity remained, or he could be honest with his daughter for the first time in months. Yeah, he said quietly. It's true. I'm staying in an old car behind a friend's garage. The silence stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. Dad, why didn't you tell me? I could have, I don't know, helped somehow. You're in school, Iris. You shouldn't have to worry about me. You're my father. The words came out sharp, almost angry. Of course I worry about you. Even when I'm mad at you, even when you disappoint me, I still... She took a shaky breath. I still love you, Dad, and I hate knowing you're living like that. Kyle's throat constricted. I love you too, and I'm sorry for everything, for the divorce, for the business failing, for not being the father you deserved. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest with me. Another pause. Are you eating? Do you need money? The irony almost made him laugh. His daughter struggling with college expenses, offering him money. I'm managing. I've got some work lined up, actually. Things are looking up. It wasn't quite a lie. The authentication fee was still months away, but he had purpose now. Direction. Promise me you'll call if you need help. Please, Dad, don't just disappear on me. I promise. And Iris, thank you for calling. Thank you for not giving up on me. After they hung up, Kyle stood in the cold evening air, phone clutched in his hand. His daughter still loved him. Despite everything, she still cared. That knowledge settled into his chest like warmth in winter. Back inside the garage, he picked up Jackie's journal again. Read her final entry one more time. Then he made a decision. He would restore this car. He would authenticate it properly. He would sell it for what it was worth. And with that money, he would rebuild his life, not just for himself, but to prove to Iris that her faith wasn't misplaced. He would honor Jackie's legacy by refusing to stay defeated. Kyle opened the Barracuda's hood and began the real work. Winter settled over the garage like a blanket of iron. Kyle worked through frozen mornings and bitter evenings, his breath visible in the unheated space, his fingers numb despite worn gloves. But the Barracuda was transforming. Earl had been true to his word. The garage, once a chaotic maze of rusted equipment and forgotten projects, was becoming functional again. They'd cleared space, organized tools, even rigged up better lighting. In exchange, Kyle had access to everything he needed: wrenches, sockets, diagnostic equipment that was outdated but serviceable. The work was slow but steady. Kyle started with the engine, breaking it down completely, cleaning each component with methodical care. The block was solid, the pistons showed minimal wear. Jackie had maintained this car well during her racing days, and despite decades of neglect, the fundamental engineering remained sound. Mac delivered on his promise, arriving one Saturday with a truck bed full of parts salvaged from his shop's inventory clearance. Gaskets, filters, spark plugs, various odds and ends that might prove useful. He refused payment, waving off Kyle's protests. "Just get that car running," Mac said. "I want to hear what a championship motor sounds like." By mid-December, Kyle had the engine reassembled. He'd spent hours cross-referencing the modifications mentioned in the prototype contract with what he found in the actual motor. Everything matched: custom intake manifold, modified camshaft, racing-grade components that weren't available on production models. Each confirmation was another piece of validation. On a grey Tuesday afternoon, with Earl watching from a folding chair and Mac on his lunch break, Kyle turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The sound was magnificent, a deep, throaty rumble that echoed through the garage. Kyle's hands gripped the steering wheel, feeling the vibration through his whole body. For a moment he could imagine Jackie behind this wheel, hearing this same sound, feeling this same power. Earl was grinning. Mac actually whooped. Kyle let the engine idle, making adjustments, listening to the rhythm. After a few minutes, he shut it down, but the triumph remained. "She lives," Earl said simply. That evening, while cleaning up, Kyle noticed something wedged beneath the spare tire mount in the trunk, an area he'd checked before but not thoroughly enough. His fingers closed around a small metal object. It was a brass plate, tarnished green with age, but still legible. Engraved text read, "Iron Mountain Rally First Place Modified Muscle, March 1971 J. Mercer Plymouth Barracuda." A trophy plate, physical proof of the victory Jackie had documented in her journal. Kyle cleaned it carefully with polish he'd found in Earl's supplies. The brass gleamed, revealing detailed engraving work. This wasn't a cheap participation award, this was craftsmanship, commemorating a genuine achievement. He added it to the growing collection of evidence. The portfolio, the contract, the journal, now the trophy plate. Each piece strengthened the car's provenance, increased its potential value, moved him closer to authentication. The next morning, Kyle's old boss stopped by, unannounced. Frank Kowalski had owned the shop where Kyle worked for 15 years before opening his own business. He was in his 60s now, still broad-shouldered and gruff, with hands as scarred as Kyle's own. They'd parted on difficult terms. When Patterson's automotive closed, Frank had offered Kyle a job, but Kyle's pride had gotten in the way. "Heard you were working on something interesting," Frank said, walking around the Barracuda. "Earl mentioned it at the diner." Kyle shot Earl a look. The old man shrugged, unrepentant. Frank examined the car with a professional eye, noting the restored engine, the cleaned body panels, the careful work evident everywhere. This is good work, Kyle. Real good. You always had the touch. Thanks, Frank. You living in this thing? No point denying it. Yeah. Frank nodded slowly, no judgment in his expression. I've got weekend work if you want it. Overflow from the shop, simple stuff, oil changes, brake jobs, 25 an hour, cash. Interested? Kyle's pride warred with necessity. Pride lost. Yeah, I'm interested. Good. Saturdays, starting this week. 8 to 4. Frank pulled out his wallet, extracted 5 20s. Consider this an advance. Buy yourself a decent meal. Frank, I can't. You can and you will. You're doing me a favor, taking work off my plate. Besides, you look like you could use some groceries. He pressed the money into Kyle's hand. See you Saturday. After Frank left, Kyle stared at the $100. More money than he'd held in months. Earl was watching him with that knowing expression. Pride's an expensive luxury, the old man said. Sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing you can do. Kyle pocketed the money, throat tight. Thank you for talking to Frank. Didn't talk to him about the job. Just mentioned you were doing interesting work on a classic car. Frank's a good man, he figured out the rest himself. That Saturday, Kyle showed up at Frank's shop at 7:45, anxious not to be late. The work was exactly as advertised, routine maintenance, nothing complicated. But it was honest work, using skills he'd honed over 3 decades, and the hours passed quickly. Frank paid him in cash at the end of the day. Same time next week? I'll be here. The money went into a coffee can Kyle kept hidden in the garage, his authentication fund. 200 from Earl, 100 from Frank's advance, now another 200 from the day's work, half the fee already saved. But that evening brought a complication. Kyle's phone buzzed with a text from Claire, his ex-wife. They rarely communicated directly anymore, everything going through lawyers or not at all. The message was brief and cutting. Heard you're obsessed with some junk car instead of getting a real job. Typical. Stop feeding Iris fantasies about you turning things around. You're just going to disappoint her again. Kyle stared at the screen, anger and hurt warring in his chest. Part of him wanted to respond, to defend himself, to explain that this wasn't obsession but opportunity. But he'd learned that arguing with Claire was pointless. She'd decided who he was, and no explanation would change that narrative. Instead, he deleted the message and went back to work. The Barracuda needed bodywork, rust removal, minor dent repair, surface preparation. Kyle attacked it methodically, using techniques he'd learned decades ago. Each panel he restored was a small victory, a visible sign of progress. Late that night, working by harsh overhead lights, Kyle paused to look at what he'd accomplished. The car was still rough, still obviously a work in progress, but it was coming back to life, piece by piece, just as he was. Jackie's journal lay on the workbench. He picked it up, read a random entry. Some days the work feels impossible. Those are the days you push hardest. Kyle nodded to her wisdom and kept working. January brought brutal cold and a rhythm to Kyle's days that felt almost like normalcy. Weekday mornings he worked on the Barracuda, afternoons he helped Earl with various projects around the property. Saturdays belonged to Frank's shop, the money steadily accumulating in the coffee can. Sundays he allowed himself rest, though his definition of rest usually involved reading Jackie's journal or researching classic car values at the library. The Authentication fund reached $400 by mid-month. Kyle was close now, tantalizingly close to being able to afford Gregory Palmer's services. The thought kept him going through frozen mornings and aching joints. One Wednesday evening, while organizing the documents for the 100th time, Kyle noticed something he'd missed before. Jackie's journal had a sealed envelope tucked into the back cover, so flat and aged that it had blended with the leather binding. His heart rate quickened as he carefully worked it free. The envelope was addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." Kyle's hands trembled as he opened it, mindful of the brittle paper. Inside was a letter, 2 pages written in Jackie's distinctive script, dated the 13th of March, 1972, 2 days before her final journal entry. He began to read. To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, it means the Barracuda survived longer than I could keep her. I hope she ended up with someone who understands what she represents, not just to me, but to anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. I've been racing for 7 years. In that time, I've beaten men who had better equipment, bigger budgets, and factory sponsorships. I've proven myself over and over, but it's never enough. The world doesn't want women who can build engines and drive fast. It wants us decorative and quiet. I'm done fighting that battle. I can't afford to anymore, literally and figuratively. But this car, she was different. Chrysler took a chance on me, built this prototype to my specifications. For a brief moment I thought maybe things were changing. The Iron Mountain Rally proved what we could do together. That victory should have opened doors. Instead, it barely registered. A female driver winning a major race should have been news. Instead, it was a footnote. I'm hiding these documents because someday they'll matter. Maybe not today, maybe not for decades, but eventually someone will care about preserving this history. Someone will understand that women were there, racing and winning, even when the record books tried to erase us. If you're reading this, I have one request. Don't let her be forgotten. She deserves better than that. We both do. More than that if you're broken like I was. If you're struggling and desperate and this discovery feels like a lifeline, don't waste it. I made mistakes, gave up too soon, let bitterness consume me. You have a chance I didn't have. Use it wisely. Let this car remind you that everything can be rebuilt if you're willing to do the work. She's worth saving. So are you. Jackie Mercer. Kyle read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face unchecked. Jackie had known. Somehow, across 5 decades, she'd known exactly who would find this car and what they'd need to hear. She'd been broken, just like him. Defeated by circumstances beyond her control, just like him. But she'd refused to let the Barracuda be forgotten, had preserved the evidence of her achievement, had created this opportunity for someone she'd never meet. Mac found him 20 minutes later, still sitting with the letter in his hands, crying quietly. "Kyle, what's wrong?" Kyle handed him the letter without speaking. Mac read it, his expression growing increasingly emotional. "She wrote this for you," Mac said softly. 50 years ago, she wrote this for you." "I know." Kyle's voice was rough. "Mac, I have to do this right. I can't just restore the car and sell it. I have to tell her story. I have to make sure people know what she accomplished." "Then that's what we'll do." They talked for hours that night, planning beyond just the authentication and sale. Kyle would document Jackie's racing career, compile the evidence, create a record that couldn't be ignored. When the car went to auction, it would carry her full story, not just as a valuable vehicle, but as a piece of women's history in motorsports. The next morning, Kyle called Iris. They'd been talking more frequently, careful conversations rebuilding fragile bridges. "Dad, everything okay?" "Yeah, sweetheart. I wanted to tell you about something I'm working on." He told her about Jackie Mercer, about a woman who'd fought to be taken seriously in a man's world, who'd won races and built engines and refused to be decorative, about how she'd hidden her story in a car, trusting the future to be kinder than her present. Iris was quiet for a long moment. "That's incredible, Dad. And you're going to restore her car?" "I'm trying to. It's slow, but I'm getting there. I'd like to hear more about her sometime. Maybe I could come see the car? When you're ready?" Kyle's breath caught. "I'd really like that. How about next month? I have a long weekend in February. Next month would be perfect." After they hung up, Kyle sat in the driver's seat of the Barracuda, imagining showing Iris what he'd accomplished. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Earl appeared in the garage doorway. "Got something to show you." The old man led Kyle to a dusty corner they hadn't fully cleared yet. Behind a stack of old tires was a rolling toolbox, professional grade, older but well-maintained. These were my competition tools, back when I did serious work. Haven't touched them in 20 years. Earl opened the drawers, revealing specialized equipment, precision measuring instruments, custom wrenches, tools Kyle hadn't had access to in years. They should be used, not gathering dust. They're yours for the project. Kyle ran his fingers over the tools, feeling their quality. Earl, this is too much. It's not enough, but it's what I can give. Jackie deserved better than she got. Let's make sure her car gets what it deserves now. With Earl's tools, Kyle's work accelerated. He could tackle bodywork with proper precision, could make repairs that had seemed impossible with basic equipment. The Barracuda continued its transformation. By late January, Kyle had saved $500. He contacted Gregory Palmer, explained the situation in careful terms, and scheduled an appointment for February 15th. Palmer's response was professional but intrigued. Based on what you've described, this could be quite significant. I look forward to examining it. February 15th. 1 month away. 1 month to finish, enough restoration to properly showcase the car's potential. 1 month to prepare for his daughter's visit. 1 month to keep believing this wasn't just another dream that would crumble. Kyle looked at Jackie's framed letter, now hanging on the garage wall, where he could see it while he worked. I won't let you down, he promised her again. We're going to make them remember you. The authentication appointment was 2 days away when Kyle discovered the second compartment. He'd been installing new trunk paneling, preparing the interior to look presentable for Palmer's inspection. The work required removing the spare tire mount completely, something he'd avoided until now because it seemed structurally sound. But for a professional evaluation, everything needed to be thorough. As he lifted the mount, his mechanic's instincts flagged something wrong. The trunk depth didn't match the exterior dimensions. There was a gap, maybe 3 inches, unaccounted for in the floor structure. Kyle's pulse quickened. He measured twice, then 3 times. The discrepancy was real. He examined the trunk floor minutely, running his fingers along every seam and weld. In the far corner, beneath where the spare tire had rested for decades, he found it a hairline gap in the metal, barely visible, expertly concealed. It took him 30 minutes of careful work to figure out the release mechanism. A small panel popped free, revealing a second hidden compartment, deeper and more deliberately engineered than the first. Inside was a canvas bag, sealed with wax that had hardened to brittleness over the decades. Kyle's hands shook as he lifted it out. The bag was heavy, unexpectedly so. He carried it to the workbench, his heart hammering against his ribs. Earl was at a doctor's appointment, Mac was at work. Kyle was alone for this discovery. He broke the wax seal carefully and opened the bag. Money. Stacks of bills, bundled with rubber bands that had degraded to sticky residue. $100 bills, their design from the early 70s, aged but unmistakable. Kyle stared, unable to process what he was seeing. He pulled out one stack, then another, counted them with trembling fingers. 20 bills per stack, $100 per bill, $2,000 per bundle. There were 20 bundles. $40,000. The number was so absurd, so impossible, that Kyle counted again, then a third time. The total didn't change. $40,000 in cash had been hidden in Jackie Mercer's car for over 50 years. A small envelope lay at the bottom of the bag, beneath the money. Kyle's hands were shaking so badly he could barely open it. Inside was a note in Jackie's handwriting, brief and direct. Racing winnings, 1,970 to 1,972. Prize money from underground circuits, paid in cash. I was saving for a future that never came. For emergencies, for freedom. Whoever finds this, use it wisely. J. M. Kyle sat down hard on the stool, the enormity of the discovery crashing over him. This wasn't just provenance anymore. This was immediate, tangible wealth. $40,000 could solve every problem he had right now. He could rent an apartment, buy clothes, eat regular meals, get his life back on track immediately. The temptation was overwhelming. He spread the money across the workbench, staring at it. Freedom, Jackie had written. This was freedom sitting in front of him. Currency that would be accepted anywhere despite its age. He could walk into a bank tomorrow, deposit it, and what? Explain where a homeless man suddenly got $40,000 in 50-year-old bills? Kyle forced himself to think through the implications. Large cash deposits triggered bank scrutiny, required documentation. Old currency raised questions. The IRS would want explanations. If he couldn't provide satisfactory answers, the money could be seized. Or worse, he could face legal problems. But surely there were ways to handle it carefully. Deposit small amounts over time. Exchange the old bills for new ones gradually. Use it for cash purchases that didn't leave paper trails. The rationalizations came easily, each one more tempting than the last. Kyle was still staring at the money when Earl returned 2 hours later. The old man stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Kyle, surrounded by stacks of cash, the opened compartment, the dazed expression. "Lord have mercy," Earl said quietly. "Is that real?" "Yeah, $40,000. Jackie's racing winnings." Kyle's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "This could change my entire life immediately." Earl walked closer, studying the money without touching it. "It could, but you need to think this through carefully, son. Money this old, this much of it, appearing suddenly, it's going to raise questions you might not want to answer." "I know. I've been thinking about exactly that for the past 2 hours. What are you going to do?" Kyle looked at Jackie's note again. "Use it wisely," she'd written. "Not quickly, not desperately, wisely." "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to grab it and run, pay off debts, get an apartment, prove to everyone I'm not a complete failure. And the other part? The other part remembers what you told me months ago. Don't sell quick just because you're hurting. This money is part of the car's story, part of Jackie's legacy. If I use it wrong, if I make mistakes out of desperation, I could ruin everything." Earl nodded slowly. "Here's what I think. You've got Palmer coming in 2 days to authenticate the car. If he confirms what we believe, that this Barracuda is worth $300,000, then you'll have legal, documented money coming. Money you can explain, that comes with paperwork and authentication. And until then? Until then, you keep this hidden. You proceed with the plan. You don't make panic decisions because you're scared this opportunity will disappear." Earl met his eyes. "Jackie survived 50 years. This money can survive another few months until you handle it properly." Kyle knew Earl was right. The smart play, the safe play, was patience. But patience was torture when freedom sat within reach. His phone buzzed. A text from Iris. "Still good for this weekend? Can't wait to see what you've been working on." This weekend. His daughter was coming to see the car, to see him, to witness what he'd been building. If she found out about this money, if she thought he'd been sitting on $40,000 while claiming poverty, the decision crystallized. Kyle carefully returned the money to the canvas bag, resealed it as best he could, and placed it back in the hidden compartment. The panel went back in place, the spare tire mount reinstalled. To anyone who didn't know it was there, the trunk looked completely normal. "I'll do this right," Kyle said, more to himself than Earl. "I'll get the car authenticated. If it's worth what we think, I'll handle everything through proper channels, the car sale, the money, all of it. Legal and documented. And if the authentication falls through, if Palmer says it's not genuine," Kyle met Earl's eyes, "then the cash is my backup plan, but I won't touch it until I know for sure." Earl gripped his shoulder. "That's wisdom talking. Jackie would approve." That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. The knowledge of the money burned in his mind like fever. $40,000, hidden mere feet from where he lay. He could solve every immediate problem. Pay Claire what he owed, help Iris with school, get his dignity back. But Jackie's letter haunted him. Use it wisely. Wisdom meant patience. It meant doing things right, even when doing things fast was so tempting. Kyle whispered into the darkness, "I promise, Jackie, I'll be smart about this. I won't waste your gift." Gregory Palmer arrived exactly on time, driving a Mercedes sedan that looked thoroughly out of place in Earl's gravel driveway. He emerged wearing pressed slacks and a wool coat, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Kyle had earned in the past 6 months. Kyle had spent the previous 48 hours in a frenzy of preparation. The garage was immaculate, the Barracuda positioned under the best lighting, all documentation organized in careful sequence. He'd showered at the community center that morning, put on his cleanest clothes, tried to look like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. Palmer was in his mid-60s, silver-haired and precise in his movements. He shook Kyle's hand with professional courtesy, then Earl's, before turning his attention to the car. "Mr. Patterson, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Shall we begin?" What followed was the most nerve-wracking 4 hours of Kyle's life. Palmer examined everything. He started with the VIN, comparing it against the prototype contract, checking for signs of tampering or alteration. He photographed the number from multiple angles, used a magnifying glass to study the stamping technique. Then the engine. Palmer spent an hour under the hood, identifying each custom component, cross-referencing them against the technical specifications in the contract. He took notes in a leather-bound journal, his expression revealing nothing. The body came next. Palmer crawled underneath with a creeper, examining the frame, checking for rust, looking for evidence of previous damage or repair. Kyle watched anxiously, aware that any significant structural issues could devalue the car dramatically. Throughout the inspection, Kyle and Earl remained silent, letting the expert work. Mac had wanted to be there but had to work probably for the best, as the tension was already suffocating. Palmer moved to the documents, studying each piece with painstaking care. The racing photographs, the championship certificates, Jackie's journal. He compared signatures, examined the paper quality, checked watermarks and printing techniques appropriate to the era. The trophy plate received particular attention. Palmer photographed it extensively, made phone calls to verify the Iron Mountain Rally's history, confirmed that records showed Jackie Mercer as the 1971 winner. By hour 3, Kyle's nerves were frayed. Palmer's face remained professionally neutral, offering no hints about his conclusions. The man could have been examining a priceless artifact or an elaborate fraud. His demeanor gave nothing away. Finally, Palmer set down his magnifying glass and looked up. "Mr. Patterson, do you understand what you have here?" Kyle's mouth went dry. "I think so, but I'd like to hear your assessment." Palmer removed his glasses, cleaned them methodically. In 1970, Chrysler built 3 prototype Barracudas with experimental racing modifications. 2 were destroyed during testing. The third, he gestured at the car, was this one, provided to Jackie Mercer for evaluation and promotional purposes. He paused, letting the significance settle. The racing provenance is legitimate. The documentation is genuine. The modifications match the prototype specifications exactly. The VIN is correct, unstamped, original factory. Palmer's expression finally shifted, showing something like excitement. "Mr. Patterson, this is one of the most significant finds I've encountered in 30 years of authentication work." Kyle's legs went weak. Earl caught his arm, steadying him. "What's it worth?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Palmer pulled a form from his briefcase, began writing. "Conservative auction estimate, in current condition, would be $180,000 to $250,000. With proper restoration, professional paint, interior work, complete mechanical rebuild, you could be looking at $300,000 or higher. The Jackie Mercer connection adds substantial value. Female racing pioneers are increasingly recognized by collectors and museums. He handed Kyle an official authentication certificate on embossed letterhead. Kyle stared at the document, the numbers swimming before his eyes. $250,000, maybe more. Life-changing money. More than enough to rebuild everything he'd lost and start over properly. I should mention, Palmer continued, that I have connections with several premier auction houses. The Monterey Classic Car Auction in August would be ideal for a vehicle of this caliber. I'd be happy to facilitate introductions if you're interested. Yes. Kyle's voice was stronger now. Yes, I'm very interested. Palmer spent another 30 minutes explaining the authentication process, what the certificate meant, how to protect the vehicle until auction. He warned Kyle about security news of a valuable discovery could attract unwanted attention. After Palmer left, Kyle and Earl stood in silence, staring at the authentication certificate. "It's real," Kyle finally said. "It's all real." Earl's eyes were misty. "Jackie's legacy is going to be remembered, and you're going to be all right, son." The celebration was modest. Mac brought beer after work, and the three men toasted to Jackie's memory and Kyle's fortune. But underneath the relief was urgent awareness. The car needed to be secured, the timeline needed to be managed, decisions needed to be made. Kyle called a bank the next morning, scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor. The conversation was awkward, explaining that he expected a large payment in 6 months without revealing too much detail, but the advisor was professional and set up a basic savings account for him. Then came the harder call. He texted Iris, "Can we meet for coffee? I need to tell you something." Her response came quickly. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, better than okay. I just need to talk to you in person." They met 2 days later at the same diner where they'd talked months before. Kyle arrived early again, rehearsing his words, trying to figure out how to explain everything without sounding insane. Iris walked in, looking cautious, worried. He'd frightened her with the mysterious summons. Kyle didn't make her wait. "I found something valuable in that car I told you about." He explained it all, the hidden compartment, Jackie Mercer's story, the racing history, the authentication, the potential value. He showed her photos of the car, the documents, Palmer's certificate. Iris listened with growing astonishment. "Dad, this is incredible. You're telling me you've been living in a car worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I didn't know at first. But yeah, basically." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, "When does it go to auction?" "August. The money won't come until then. But when it does, you'll be able to—" She stopped, tears welling up. "You'll be able to get your life back." "That's the plan." Kyle reached across the table, took her hand. "Iris, I want you to come see the car, see what I've been working on. I think you'd appreciate Jackie's story. She was fighting against a system that tried to keep her down. She didn't let it win." "Like you're not letting it win?" "I'm trying not to." Iris squeezed his hand. "I'd love to see it. How about this weekend?" Kyle's heart swelled. This weekend would be perfect. After she left, he sat in the diner for another hour, coffee growing cold, authentication certificate in his pocket. Everything was falling into place. The car would sell, he'd rebuild his life, he'd restore his relationship with his daughter. For the first time in 2 years, the future looked brighter than the past. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. Kyle had barely slept, anxiety and anticipation warring in his chest. He'd spent Friday evening cleaning the garage one more time, arranging the Barracuda under the best light, organizing Jackie's documents for easy viewing. Iris arrived at 10, parking her modest sedan beside the garage. Kyle's heart hammered as he watched her get out, looking uncertain and a little nervous. They hadn't spent real time together in over a year. This moment felt fragile, important beyond measure. "Hey, Dad." She gave him a tentative hug. "Hey, sweetheart, thanks for coming." He led her inside. The Barracuda sat gleaming under the work lights, not perfect, but dramatically improved from the wreck Kyle had purchased months ago. Chrome had been polished, the engine compartment cleaned, visible bodywork restored. It looked like what it was, a car coming back to life. Iris stopped, taking it in. "Dad, you did this?" "With a lot of help from Earl and Mac. But yeah, mostly me." She walked around the car slowly, running her fingers along the fender, peering through the windows. Kyle watched her, trying to read her reaction. "Tell me about her," Iris said. "About Jackie." So Kyle did. He showed her the photographs, explained how Jackie had fought for recognition in a male-dominated world. He read passages from the journal, let Iris hold the trophy plate. He explained the prototype contract, the racing victories, the deliberate hiding of documents. "She gave up," Kyle said quietly. "The world wore her down, and she gave up racing. But she made sure her story would survive, even if she couldn't keep fighting." Iris studied Jackie's photograph, that fierce young woman standing beside her car, daring the world to dismiss her. "She sounds amazing and sad." Iris looked at her father. "Is that why this matters so much to you? Because you relate to her?" Kyle had promised himself he'd be honest. "Yeah. I failed, Iris. Failed at my business. Failed at my marriage. Failed at being your father. I let circumstances break me instead of fighting back." "Dad, let me finish, please." He took a breath. Living in this car was rock bottom. I'd given up, just like Jackie did. But finding her story reminded me that giving up isn't the end. She preserved something valuable for the future, trusted that it would matter to someone. That someone turned out to be me. Tears were running down Iris's face now. "You didn't fail at being my father. You failed at some things, sure. We all do. But you never stopped being my dad. I wasn't there when you needed me. You're here now." She wiped her eyes. "And you're doing something incredible. You're honoring this woman's legacy and rebuilding your own life at the same time." Kyle couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He pulled out the photograph he always carried Iris at 7, grinning in the garage. The crease where he'd held it was visible, the edges worn soft. "I've carried this every single day," he said. "Even when I had nothing else, I had this. You've been with me through everything." Iris took the photograph, studied it, then looked up at her father with streaming eyes. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Not because you found something valuable, because you didn't give up." They hugged then, really hugged, and Kyle felt years of pain and regret releasing from his chest. This was what mattered, not the money coming, not the validation of authentication, but this moment with his daughter. When they pulled apart, Iris was smiling through tears. "So what happens now? Now I finish the restoration. Professional help for the things I can't do myself. Paint, chrome work, interior. The auction is in August. How much do you think it'll actually sell for?" Palmer estimated 250,000, maybe more with full restoration. Iris's eyes widened. "That's enough to completely restart your life." "That's the plan. Buy a small house, get stable work, save for the future." He paused. "Maybe see my daughter for dinner sometimes." "I'd like that. I'd really like that." They spent the next 2 hours in the garage. Kyle showed her the engine, explained the modifications, let her sit in the driver's seat. Earl stopped by and charmed Iris with stories about classic cars. Mac arrived with sandwiches, and they all ate together, talking and laughing like a strange makeshift family. As afternoon faded toward evening, Iris prepared to leave. At her car, she turned back to Kyle. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What are you going to do about Mom? She's been—" Iris hesitated. "She's been saying things about you, that you're delusional, chasing fantasies instead of getting real work." Kyle felt the familiar anger rise, but pushed it down. "Your mother sees what she wants to see. I can't control that. I can only control my own actions. She's going to feel pretty stupid when this car sells for $250,000. Maybe. But I'm not doing this to prove anything to her. I'm doing it for me and for Jackie's memory. And he met his daughter's eyes, to show you that your father isn't the failure everyone thinks he is. I never thought you were a failure, Dad. I thought you'd given up. There's a difference. After Iris left, Kyle stood in the garage, looking at the Barracuda with fresh eyes. His daughter had seen it, understood it, recognized what he was trying to accomplish. That validation meant more than Palmer's certificate. Earl appeared beside him. That went well. Better than I dared hope. She loves you, Kyle. She always did. She just needed to see you fighting again. Kyle nodded, too emotional to speak. The weight of the coming months settled on his shoulders, months of careful work, strategic decisions, managing the cash hidden in the trunk, preparing for the auction. But for the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. He had purpose, he had support, he had his daughter's respect, and he had Jackie's legacy to honor. Time to finish this properly, Kyle said. Let's make her beautiful. August arrived with California sunshine and impossible heat. The Monterey Classic Car Auction was scheduled for August 20th, 3 days away, and Kyle had spent the previous 6 months transforming the Barracuda from project to masterpiece. The professional work had required most of Jackie's hidden cash. Kyle had agonized over the decision for weeks before finally accepting that investing the money into the car's restoration was the wisest use. He'd found a reputable restorer who specialized in vintage muscle cars, explained the situation carefully, and paid in installments that wouldn't raise suspicions. The paint was now flawless, the original color, a deep metallic blue called in-violet, gleaming like liquid. Chrome had been replated, the interior reupholstered in correct period materials. Every mechanical system had been rebuilt to factory specifications, then tested and tuned until the engine purred with that distinctive racing rumble. The Barracuda had been transformed. She was beautiful, powerful, a rolling piece of history that turned heads wherever she appeared. Kyle had used the remaining cash, carefully small deposits over months, exchanged for newer bills at different banks. Nothing that would trigger scrutiny. He'd rented a modest apartment in March, gotten regular work at Frank's shop, slowly rebuilt the infrastructure of a normal life. But he'd kept living simply, saving everything he could, knowing the real payoff was still ahead. Now the moment had arrived. The Barracuda sat on a professional trailer, ready for transport to Monterey. Earl and Mac were coming, riding together in Mac's truck, and Iris had taken time off from summer classes to be there. The past 6 months had seen their relationship blossom. Weekly dinners had become routine, phone calls frequent and easy. They talked about everything now, her studies, his work, their shared love of cars and machines. The wounds weren't completely healed, but they were healing. Kyle drove to Monterey the day before the auction, his stomach a knot of nerves and excitement. The registration process was smooth. Palmer had facilitated everything, ensuring the Barracuda was positioned among the premier lots. The car was assigned to the Saturday evening session when the most serious collectors would be bidding. That evening, Kyle stood in the auction house's display area, watching people examine the Barracuda. A placard beside it told Jackie's story, the female racing pioneer, the championship victory, the prototype specifications. Museum curators made notes. Collectors photographed details. Journalists asked questions. Jackie was being remembered, her story finally told to people who understood its significance. Earl found Kyle standing there, misty-eyed. "She'd be proud, you know, of what you've done. I just told the truth. Jackie did the hard part 50 years ago." Saturday afternoon arrived too quickly. Kyle, Iris, Earl, and Mac found seats in the auction hall, positioned where they could see both the car and the bidders. Kyle's hands were shaking. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd hoped for, came down to the next 30 minutes. The auctioneer was a professional, his voice carrying authority and excitement. He presented the Barracuda's history with theatrical flair, emphasizing Jackie's achievements and the car's unique provenance. The engine was started, filling the hall with that magnificent rumble. Bidding opened at $150,000. Kyle's heart hammered as the price climbed. 175, 200, 225. Two collectors were battling now, a man in a tailored suit and a woman with a museum credential badge. 250,000. Palmer's conservative estimate had been reached, but the bidding continued. 260, 275, 290. Iris grabbed Kyle's hand, squeezing hard. Mac was grinning. Earl had tears in his eyes. 300,000. The suited man hesitated, then raised his paddle again. 310. The museum curator countered immediately. 325. The suited man shook his head, lowering his paddle. He was out. The auctioneer's voice rose. $325,000. Going once, going twice. A new bidder entered, someone Kyle hadn't noticed before. 340,000. The museum curator grimaced but countered. 350,000. The new bidder raised again. 360,000. A pause. The curator shook her head reluctantly. $360,000, the auctioneer announced. Going once, going twice, sold. The gavel fell. Kyle couldn't breathe. $360,000. After auction fees and commissions, he'd net approximately $300,000. More money than he'd ever imagined. More than enough to transform his entire life. Iris was crying, hugging him fiercely. "Dad, oh my God, Dad!" Mac clapped him on the back, laughing. Earl just smiled, satisfied and proud. In the parking lot afterward, waiting for payment processing, Kyle walked over to where the Barracuda sat. The new owner was already examining it, running appreciative hands over the restored bodywork. "Beautiful work," the man said. "You restored this yourself?" "Most of it." "Yeah. The woman who drove this, Jackie Mercer, she deserves to be remembered. I'm donating it to a motorsports museum. Her story will be preserved." Kyle felt something release in his chest. Not just sold, but honored. Jackie's legacy would live on in a place where people could learn, appreciate, understand. "She'd like that," Kyle said quietly. "Thank you." That evening, they celebrated at a restaurant overlooking the ocean. Kyle, Iris, Earl, and Mac, the people who'd supported him through everything. The bank transfer would process in 3 days, but the hard part was over. Iris raised her glass. "To Jackie Mercer, who never gave up on her dream, and to my dad, who learned from her example," they toasted. Kyle looked at his daughter, her eyes bright with pride and love, and felt complete in a way he hadn't in years. "To second chances," he said softly, "and the people who help us find them." Later, alone in his hotel room, Kyle whispered to Jackie's memory one final time. "Thank you. For everything. You saved my life." 6 months had passed since the auction, and Kyle Patterson stood on the small porch of his house, coffee in hand, watching the autumn leaves drift across his modest front yard. The house wasn't large, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a garage he'd converted into a workshop, but it was his. Paid in cash, no mortgage, no debt hanging over his head. The November morning was crisp and quiet. Through the window, he could see the guest bedroom he'd prepared with careful attention. Clean sheets, fresh paint, photographs on the wall showing happier times. Iris visited twice a month now, sometimes more. Tonight was their weekly dinner, a tradition they'd maintained without fail since the auction. His phone buzzed. A text from Mac. "Still on for Saturday. Found a '69 Camaro that needs your magic touch." Kyle smiled and typed back. "Wouldn't miss it." The workshop had become his sanctuary. Frank had offered him a management position at the main shop, but Kyle had declined politely. Instead, he worked independently now, taking on restoration projects for select clients, building a reputation for quality work and fair prices. The money from the Barracuda had given him the freedom to choose his projects, to work at his own pace, to live without desperation, driving every decision. On his living room wall hung a framed copy of Jackie's letter, the one she'd written to future owners, expressing hope that someone would understand what the car represented. Visitors always asked about it, and Kyle always told Jackie's story. He'd become something of an advocate for her legacy, corresponding with the museum that now housed the Barracuda, contributing to articles about female racing pioneers. Part of the auction proceeds had funded a small scholarship in Jackie's name at a technical college specifically for young women pursuing automotive careers. The first recipient had sent Kyle a thank you note that he kept in his desk drawer. She reminded him of Jackie in her determination and passion. The scholarship had been Iris's idea. They'd been discussing what to do with the money, and she'd said simply, "Jackie gave you a second chance. Now you can give someone else theirs." $15,000 in the scholarship fund. A small gesture compared to what Jackie had given him, but it felt right. Her legacy wasn't just preserved, it was actively helping others. Claire had reached out once. After news of the auction sale spread through their small community, the message had been brief, grudging. "I heard about the car. Glad you got your act together." Kyle had responded with simple gratitude, no bitterness. She was part of his past, and while that past held pain, he'd moved beyond the need for her validation. He'd forgiven her, forgiven himself, and found peace in the present. His relationship with Iris had deepened beyond his hopes. They talked about everything now, her classes, her future plans, his projects, their shared memories. She'd brought friends by to meet him, proudly introducing him as "my dad," the car restoration expert. The wounds from the divorce and custody battle hadn't vanished, but they'd scarred over cleanly, no longer sources of active pain. She'd even started helping in the workshop occasionally, learning advanced techniques, rediscovering the joy they'd once shared working on cars together. Those Saturday mornings with Iris, teaching her to rebuild carburetors or adjust timing, were precious in ways money could never measure. Earl's health had declined slightly, age catching up with the old mechanic, but he still visited weekly, offering wisdom and companionship. They'd become genuine friends, the kind forged through shared struggle and triumph. Mac remained a constant presence, helping with projects, sharing meals, proof that true friendship endures through the worst times. Kyle walked back inside and poured fresh coffee. On his kitchen table sat a new project folder, a client who'd inherited a 1967 Mustang from her grandmother and wanted it restored to honor the woman's memory. The story had resonated with Kyle immediately. He understood what it meant to preserve legacies now. The doorbell rang. But Kyle wasn't concerned anymore. He opened the door to find Iris standing there with grocery bags and a bright smile. "Thought I'd come early and we could cook together," she said. "I found that recipe you used to make, remember? The one Grandma taught you?" Kyle's throat tightened with emotion. "I remember. Come in, sweetheart." They spent the afternoon in the kitchen, cooking and talking, the conversation flowing easily between comfortable silences. Music played softly from Kyle's old radio. Sunlight streamed through clean windows. The house smelled of garlic and herbs and home. Over dinner, Iris mentioned she'd been thinking about graduate school, possibly studying automotive engineering. Kyle listened with pride as she outlined her plans, offering encouragement and perspective when asked. "You know," she said, setting down her fork, "I've been thinking about Jackie a lot lately, about how she fought so hard but never got to see her work recognized. She saw some of it, the victory in '71, the championship, that mattered. But she never knew her car would end up in a museum, that her story would inspire people. She died thinking she'd been forgotten." Kyle nodded slowly. "That's true. But she planted seeds anyway, without knowing if they'd ever grow. That takes a special kind of faith. You have that faith now too. I can see it in how you work, how you live." After Iris left, Kyle stood at his living room window, watching her taillights disappear down the street. His reflection stared back from the darkened glass, older, weathered, but no longer defeated. The man in the mirror had survived rock bottom and climbed back to solid ground. He turned to Jackie's framed letter on the wall, reading the familiar words one more time. "You were right," he whispered. "Everything can be rebuilt if you're willing to do the work." Outside, the November night settled over his small house, his small life, a life that felt fuller and richer than any mansion could provide. Kyle had learned what Jackie understood in her final years. Success isn't measured in championships or recognition, but in the quiet dignity of work done well and the people who love you despite your failures. The Barracuda had given him more than money. It had given him purpose, reconnection, and proof that broken things, cars and people alike, could be made beautiful again. Kyle turned off the lights and headed to bed, grateful for second chances and the wisdom to use them well.